introducing Daryl Jamieson with the very appropriate title of presentation, Why We Should Listen. All right. Oh, you got that? Go ahead. Take it away. Okay, so let's start. I began with the John Cage, the first movement of John Cage's very famous 4 minutes 33 seconds, which is conveniently the shortest movement. You've probably all heard John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds. Is this familiar to everybody? It's basically a piece where where the performer doesn't do anything. But the music is the sounds of whatever is happening. So in this particular case, there was some noise from the door opening. There's, of course, the noise of the fridge. There's the noise of whatever's happening on the street. Some people were moving their hands. Maybe you heard a bit of... It's actually, the fridge is quite loud. It's causing quite a lot of the sonic activity in this particular performance of the first movement of 4 minutes 33 seconds. But the whole point of it is it's a subversion of the social codes of listening, of attentive listening. And by standing at the front of a room in a position where normally somebody would talk, or somebody would play a piano, or somebody would play a violin, and you get ready to listen, and then nothing comes, your ears are still pumped and ready and primed for listening. And what you're going to listen to are things that you normally ignore. And basically what I'm going to talk today about is why it's interesting and possibly important. What did I call the title? What was the title? Oh, ethics. Why we should listen. So yeah, why we should listen to those things that we normally ignore. And I'm going to base a lot of this on Joe Kondo's work, not his work, Sight Rhythmics, but his work, Homo Audiens, which is a book about listening and a book about how we listen. And it's, but I thought, well, I should introduce who Joe Kondo is before I talk a lot about him. And Joe Kondo was my teacher, to be clear, so I know a lot about him. And I also translated the book 2 years ago. But in order to introduce you to Joe Kondo through his principal medium, which is not being a music theorist or thinker about music, but actually as a composer, I thought, let's listen to about 30 seconds. Having listened to 33 seconds of Cage, let's listen to 33 seconds of Joe Kondo. Oh, that's not working. Why didn't that work? That's not working, is it? Sorry, can you just go out for a second?
Yeah, we'll perhaps skip it.
No, please play the...
We're getting treated to more Cage.
Well, exactly. It's a trick Cage. It's a trick.
Subversion. Cage subversion.
You were able to play it.
I was able to play
We're
it.
in the cage.
Cage
It's
match.
possibly
Cage's cage.
Possibly
That's
it's because I'm doing the recording thing.
Stop the clock.
Oh, okay. Well, you want to just go, close that and go into the
Yes, but then we won't have the screen recording. Is
it's
that
fine.
okay?
It's fine. Like, the audio, the audio is the more important.
Hell.
Let's try this again.
Need some
think that's enough of that. It's a beautiful piece. It's about 12 minutes long, so please go, if you liked it, please go listen to more. What he's trying to do in this piece is sort of, he's mixing elements of tonality and elements of atonality. Does that make sense to everybody? We're all on board with atonality? And he's mixing them together to be sort of to create an ambiguity. That's not really the point of my talk today, though. That was more of an introduction of Joe Kondo. The key point is this book, Homo Audiens, which was translated by me. That's also not the key point. It's called Kikuhito in Japanese. It was written in 2013. And in this book, he talks about what he calls a polystylistic culture. He calls our culture a polystylistic culture. And what he is interested in is emphasizing the importance of intercultural exchange of methods of interpretation in order to more fully understand the other. I'm just reading what it says there, as you noticed. And this is where I'm going to disagree with what Jay said in the first talk quite strongly. This is now a quote from Joe. So this is the Japanese original for those of you who read Japanese, and my translation of it. Each and every listener has the right to form their own interpretations or understandings. You, as a listener, through the creation of your own interpretation, make the piece your own. The listener's act of interpretation is appropriately concluded by making the piece their own. In order to make a contribution to cultural invigoration, the listener must open their own interpretation or understanding outside of themselves and articulate it to others. So, what this means is that Joe Kondo and me, and in fact, what we generally call experimental music. Experimental music generally takes the point of view that the listener is equal to the composer in what a piece means. Or more clearly said, the composer is just a listener. The composer is the first listener, but he's still just a listener. I'm using the word he, which is terrible. The composer, I'll just say the composer. They are just a listener, right? And every listener is equal in the right of interpretation. So one can listen to, for example, Beethoven, the opening of Beethoven's Ninth, and hear a heartbeat, as some people did. You don't have to, though. You can hear whatever you want.
I agree.
Yes, thank you very much.
They're not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive. No, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not an antagonistic position. It's an opening up. And what the second part of this is saying is that in order to live in a polystylistic culture, in order to live in a culture where we understand the other rather than just live beside and ignore each other, we have to understand how other people experience the world. Music is a microcosm of this idea. So, I'm going to very suddenly switch modes right now to seemingly a completely different topic. We'll come back to this polystylistic thing later. So another thing Joe Kondo says, I believe that in music each sound has to have its own entity and life. A sound is a living being. And this is an idea which is very Buddhist. And it comes from this doctrine, which is a common doctrine in Japanese Buddhism and not really very common outside of Japan. It comes from China, but it was not popular in China. The Buddhahood of non-sentience. Basically, the idea is, depending on which school of Buddhism you're in, either the idea that things like plants or rocks or water could have a kind of consciousness and could be potentially, but probably aren't, Buddhas, all the way through to, well, stopping off at things like rocks and plants and animals and water are equally spiritually valuable to humans, and all the way up to, in the most esoteric Shingon type of perspective, there are some people who argue that a rock is a much better chance of becoming a Buddha than a human does. After all, what does a rock do? It's meditating 24 hours a day. No human can do that. We have to stop. We have to go to the toilet. We have to bathe. We have to eat. A rock is 24 hours a day meditating. We can't beat that. So a rock is a better Buddha than us. So those are the ranges of interpretations of this doctrine that existed in medieval Japanese Buddhism. There's a lot of problems with what this means as well. We could talk about the problems later, but there's time limits and stuff. It was used for colonialist and appropriation purposes. We could talk about it later if you ask a question about that, if that's interesting. But basically, all entities, including non-sentient ones, could be or already are Buddhas. Different schools differently did it. Kondo himself cites the Kegon interpretation as the inspiration behind his compositional method of listening composition, whereas John Cage was influenced by the Zen interpretation of this, which is a more concerned with chance and randomness and just letting things be as they are, not trying to control them. Whereas Joe Kondo tries to listen very carefully and listen to hear, what does the sound want? What does the sound want to hear next? Whereas John Cage just listens to the sound and isn't interested in things like intentionality or things like that. I'm going to bring up Dogen because everyone likes Dogen. He's the most important philosopher, why not? These three poems are really beautiful, I think. They're translations by Miranda Shaw. Mountain colors, valley echoes, everything as it is, Shakyamuni's voice and body. The book Shakyamuni is the name of the historical Buddha, if we didn't know that. So in other words, the echoes of the valley and the colors of the mountains, just things as they are the Buddha. This is very John Cage. I mean, obviously, John Cage is being Dogen-ish, not Dogen being Cage-ish, but, everyone knows Cage, so that's the more clear reference. Monkey cries from the mountain echo in the valley. I listen only to the preaching of this sutra. So the sutra is being read in the scriptorium, to bring that word in, that are being read and copied in the scriptorium. Those are less important to Dogen, who is like the most important philosopher in Japanese history, one of, arguably. The sound of the monkeys crying. No, not the sound of the monkeys crying. The echo of the sound of the monkeys. Like, how many steps removed from the monkey are we? We're now 3 steps removed from the monkey. It's getting into Dogen's brain, and that's still more important than what the Buddha said. As I listened, I became the sound of rain on the eaves. This is an interpenetration of bodily forms, of phenomenal forms here. Listening is a 360-degree sense. Listening is a sense you can't turn off. If you listen carefully, you really are opening your whole mind up to the entirety of the world, including to the point of becoming the rest of the world. It's listening much more than sight, because sight you can do. Well, sight has limited vision. You have limited vision, right? 120 degrees. Ears, they're all around. You can't taste anything unless it's actually physically right there. You can't touch anything that's not physically right there. What am I missing? I'm missing a sense. Smell. Smell is a good one. Smell maybe second to hearing, but of course in Japanese you hear incense instead of smell it. They use the kanji oko o kiku, right? So yeah, so smell and things. I very briefly wanted to bring up the Death Mounter group because they're very cool. Back in the 1970s, they were a group of Shingon monks who applied this idea of the spiritual quality of all nature and humans, and to protest against pollution. This was an era where there was very lax regulation of factories and industry in Japan. And so these guys would go and they would go sit outside of factories which were causing pollution and causing disease and causing problems, and they would protest. They used traditional esoteric killing curses against the CEOs of these factories. I'm not sure if any of them worked, but they did it. That's the key point. So, bringing all these things together, ethics and care toward non-human. So why this idea of experimental listening matters. So experimental in the sense of trying out new ideas or retrying old paradigms in the search for new ways. So experimental listening is drawing on this idea, these ideas from medieval Japanese Buddhist ideas to reconfigure the way we experience ourselves in the world. And organized sound, which I noticed came up on one of the slides in Kurt's presentation. Organized sound is a pretty traditional contemporary definition of what music can be. It's sort of a standard definition of modernist music, is organized sound. But organizing sound has always been a metaphor for organizing society. And often the big changes in musical history have happened when there have been big societal changes. 12-tone music comes out at a time when democracy is spreading across the world because it's a democratic system of organizing the notes where every note is equal. When there's one note that's more important than the others, that's tonal music, that's classical music, comes at a time when absolute monarchy is of extreme is the main form of government around Europe. So it's always been a form. In experimental music, we experiment with new forms of organization, both interpersonal and interspecies. And this is where we come back to the idea of listening to the things you don't normally listen to. Listening to other species, listening with intention, with the same sort of attention that you would give to the favorite piece of music you have, or listening with the same attention that you would give to a friend who's telling you a very interesting story. But listen to the crows, listen to the water, listen to the ocean, listen to the fridge. What does the fridge want to tell us? I don't know. We have to. It's working.
It's working. Yes.
Maybe it wants us to appreciate its hard work.
Thank you for your
Thank you for your service. Yes. So, and listening is an artificial category. It's useful up to a point. I'm really talking about all of the different senses. You can apply the same sort of logic to eyes, and you always need a whole body interpenetration with the world, because perception always involves the whole body. And the idea of 5 senses is a little bit out of date anyway. From what I understand, there's something like 40 senses that scientists have come up with and noticed, and now I'm over time. But this lines up with this unimpeded interpenetration of phenomena, which is again another Keigon thought. I want to leave you with one last slide, even though I'm over time. The aesthetics of unscenic nature. Yuriko Saito had this lovely idea that there is an ethical imperative to pay attention to the unscenic or the not traditionally beautiful, which is as evolved as we are, as deserving of protection as humans, which are also other Buddhas, if you want to reframe it in the way that I was framing it earlier, whether they're sentient or not. There's important, they're have as much spiritual worth as humans do, and we have to take care of them. So we have to let go of traditional ways of hearing, and we have to let go of the idea that a composer or anyone can tell us what to do, including, of course, me, so you can, ignore me, ignore everything I'm saying, because I don't have any more right to tell you what to do than anybody else does. But in Kegon Buddhism and in a lot of other related religions, including in Hinduism, everything is a reflection of everything else. We have to respect all things as a reflection of the Buddha nature within ourselves. And as Yuriko Saito says, come to appreciate sounds and all those other sense properties, why you might initially find unpleasant, which might, I think that sentence is all wrong, which you might find initially unpleasant because they too have life and perhaps even will and are meaningful to someone or something equally worthy of respect. So thank you for listening. Yeah, it is hard to stay on time, isn't it?
It's very fast.
Very, very fast.
So
20
fast.
minutes is nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, floor is open for questions. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to ask you, because I was a philosophy major in university. I
Okay.
got a master's. I worked a lot with Heraclitus, which is not relevant to what you're asking. So basically, you're claiming that this is an ethical imperative, which is that requires some philosophical legwork to give an aesthetic appreciation to an ethical imperative. And there's also metaphysics, which isn't really broached in that area, which
Right.
you were describing now anyways.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I'm just curious what you would say about what is the link between aesthetic appreciation of sounds as sounds, which is just description of those
Yeah.
sounds, and why is this placed on it, why is it incumbent on us then, within this Buddhist framework, to therefore have a perspective on objects? Like, why is there this ethical demand on us based on an aesthetic feature of objects?
I think it's probably the other way around, for starters. I think the ethical demand comes first.
Okay.
And what Yuriko Saito, so the ethical demand is that all of these, everything is potentially a Buddha.
Yeah.
Everything is potentially of equal spiritual value, if not more spiritual, have more spiritual value than you do. So you have no right to ignore them, basically. What Yuriko Saito says is that within the current modernist Enlightenment, late capitalist way of thinking of things, or the Abrahamic religion way of thinking of things, the Western way of thinking of things, is that humans are at the top of a pyramid and we can control and we can manage everything else. And so from that, so she's arguing from within that context, aesthetics can be a tool, a useful tool for helping us we are all born into that context, no matter which country we're from. We're all born into modernity. And in order to escape that way of thinking, aesthetics can be a method of helping to learn to appreciate those other non-human or other humans that we might put into the category of other. And listening or viewing or other types of senses are ways, aesthetic categories, which can help us to appreciate that more. So it's the logic of why we should do it is the other way around, but the aesthetics can be also used as a tool.
Okay. Fair.
Does that make sense? Yeah, and I could talk a lot
Yeah,
about
I
the,
could
the
too,
metaphysics
I
and
could
stuff.
too. Yeah, I could
So
too as well.
well, we'll do it. We'll have more drinks.
I mean,
Yeah.
your office is like right.
My
here,
office is right
in
around the
front
corner,
of Ohashi
and
campus is
All right.
like that.
Yes.
It's right
I have a lot of these Japanese philosophy books, which have very different points of view from the Western ones. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for the beautiful talk. For one, I don't know if you were in disagreement. Maybe a little bit about the method. I didn't quite get there in my talk. I do want to ask about, there is certain quality of, like, you. So you mentioned the stone is the ultimate Buddha.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the stone. We all recognize what a stone is, and so in a sense, we default to this idea of the stone. We know that there is something that, like, we can anchor into. But also in the nature of your talk, there's something that we could, like, interpret it whatever we want. It's weird that I'm taking the more conservative side of the argument because I agree with you ultimately.
Yeah.
But isn't there something that can help sort of ground us in helping us to get to a place where we listen in a way that's more free?
I think
You can't just say, like, okay, yeah, say it's a cat. No, it's a stone, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So there must be a place, a starting point, where you can then go into the realm of interpretation.
right. Yeah. I think that's where Cage is very useful. Cage was asked very late in his life. I'll put up this picture again because I really like it.
It's so
So-
Cage. It's so
Yeah,
Cage. Yeah.
this is I think his final birthday. I
Yeah.
think he was 90 when he died, so this is his 90th birthday. No, 80. Sorry, 80. He was 80. So he was asked, like, because he wrote 4 minutes 33 seconds in 1952. He died 40 years later. He was asked towards the end of his life.
So halfway through his life. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He took a long time. It was a very serious. He did a lot. He took him 5 years to write the piece.
Yeah, and every composer after was jealous of him.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because it can only be done once.
Yeah.
It's not like a sonata where you can just take the form and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've done it. But he was asked, like, what do you think of this piece now? Like, it sort of made you notorious, and a lot of people hate you for it, and a lot of people think you're a joker or you're not serious because of it. And he said, I perform 4 minutes and 33 seconds every day. And that's enough of an answer. Like, in a way, it's a kind of meditation.
Yeah.
It's a practice of just going anywhere, including just in your own bedroom if you want, and just closing your eyes and really just listening carefully to what you wouldn't normally notice, and paying attention. It's a kind of attentiveness. And how you interpret it? Oh, we could get into interpretation. Interpretation is a whole nother thing, because when you get into, like, well, yeah, is it a stone or is it a cat? Of course. Well, why not? Why couldn't it be? Why couldn't the stone have some catness to it?
I think it can.
It can.
I think
Why
it
not?
definitely can. But in the end, if we're trying to tell a story, like,
Well,
on
if you ask every sculptor, a sculptor will very often tell you, like, oh, I just touched the marble, and I just removed the parts that weren't the cat.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard tons of sculptors talk like that about the forms that they create.
Yeah, no,
out of
I
natural
guess my
material.
question comes from a point of, if I find it very curious that I find myself on the conservative side of the argument, because I
Yeah.
quite agree with a lot of things that you're saying, but I still find myself in a place where there's room for even getting, like, guided meditations, say. Like, to get
Yeah.
someone there, you need to set a framework in which they can get to a place where they can then interpret. And that
Yeah.
requires something of a benchmark. Anyway, I don't
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, 4 minutes 30 seconds is a framework.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a rhythm, in fact,
Yeah.
is what it is.
Yep.
Because rhythm is just time.
Yeah.
There's this YouTuber, I can't for life remember his name, but he basically takes, like, everyday sounds, like the fridge, for example, or, like, some kind of vibration, and then he'll turn that into, like, he'll morph that into, like, some kind of electronic music genre, some, like, techno or some drum and bass thing where he's taking the sound. What do you think of that kind of approach to, like, making music?
What do I think about it? what I think about it is, well, for starters, it's very different from what I do. And I haven't heard this YouTuber's work, so it's hard. But in general, I think you can interpret it in multiple ways. You could interpret it colonially or extractively and say they're extracting sounds, trying to control it, exert power over what the natural thing is, or, because I don't know what this particular person is doing, or they could be really listening intently and finding the innate rhythms that are hidden in there and just accentuating them, bringing them out, making them clearer. And that could be doing a great service. That could be a dialogue.
Yes.
So it could, so I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is, he always starts his videos with like the raw sound as it is,
Yeah.
and then it slowly, becomes that thing. So
Yeah.
he's kind of drawing attention to the raw sound at the start. So you're not hearing the final product as it's been manipulated. You're hearing it from start to finish.
That sounds more positive from this particular point of view. Yeah, it sounds like I'd be more interested in that than a piece that just started with we're well over time, but Jonathan Harvey has a series of pieces in which he takes. There's one particular piece called the Bird Concerto, which is a concerto for piano and orchestra and bird song, and throughout it begins with bird song being played on an electric piano by the soloist, and over the 30 minutes of the piece, those become electronically manipulated, and so do the wind, the wind instruments, the flute and the clarinet and the oboe. They also get electronically manipulated until they cross each other, and then they go out the other side, where the birds are being manipulated into singing the flute songs, and the flutes are starting to play the bird songs. And I mean, there's another Zen saying that's very famous, and probably anyone who's studied any sort of Zen has heard this before. But it is, before you study Zen, the mountain is a mountain. When you're studying Zen, the mountain is not a mountain. And after you've attained enlightenment, the mountain is a mountain. And it's that sort of process. Like, so if you start with the thing and then it becomes not the thing, and then at the end of it you're still able to understand the thing as the thing in itself, then that's a good model. That's a respectful model under this way of listening, I would say. Yes.
It sounds very philosophical. I think what you're saying is actually sort of solving the conflicts between what your views. So I think whether you need a guide or you don't need a guide, it's not absolute things. It's probably depending on which level you are as a listener. So for me, I know nothing. I'm very ignorant of music, and then I actually do need what Jay said. I need a guidance. Otherwise, I will just go sleep.
Familiarity with it.
With the guidance, with the little bit of background,
familiarity.
and then I can really enjoy it.
Hey,
Yeah.
classical music's not that
Right.
boring.
Exactly.
Well,
but if
yeah.
I'm very experienced, if I have a lot of knowledge about music already,
Mhm.
and then I can, go free.
Yeah.
And then like what John,
Yeah.
what your supervisor or your teacher said.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything go free because I already have the base.
Well,
And I know how to enjoy it already. And then like
but
you said,
you
okay,
you
become-
know how somebody else told you how to enjoy it, which is different than you enjoying it yourself.
So I think there's also maybe that's the first stage, like you learn as a mountain, and then you start to question it, right? And then
Yeah.
the highest stage is where you can really understand the nature.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think this is so depending on which stage you are, and you need guidance and you don't need guidance.
Yeah.
We've really bookended each other.
Yeah.
So that's just my understanding.
Yeah.
I don't know any of these things.
I-
Just from your talk.
Yeah, what I would say that I don't think it's a bad thing to want guidance when you're listening to classical music, or whether you're listening to John Cage, or whether you're listening to the river. If you, it'd be great to go to the river with someone who really knows the river and can point out, this spot's going to sound really good because there's sort of like there's more bubbles over here, and like at this time of the year there's more water flowing, and so this is the time you want to go and listen to the river. Or sure, that could be useful, but isn't it a lot of fun just to go and figure it out yourself?
So I think that's instead of guidance, I would rather call it basic knowledge. So for whatever you do, you need the basics to be able to be expert.
If you want to understand why Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is revolutionary in terms of its form and structure, you absolutely need that. You're right. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. All I would say is you can just listen to the sounds and love them, and you don't have to understand the structure. You don't have to understand.
I agree wholeheartedly.
That,
we agree.
Yes. Beethoven has taken this thing, like that Haydn invented this form, and Mozart really perfected this form, and then Beethoven broke the form. And yeah, that's all great historical stuff to know, but it's also just sounds really nice.
Yes.
So just listen to it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
And if that enhances your knowledge, and if that's the way you want to listen to it, of course that's okay. Yeah. I'm not saying that's a wrong way to listen to classical music, but what makes me nervous is that when people think they have to know that first. Because if they think they have to know that, then if they think going to a classical music concert is like going to school, then they're not going to go.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've gone 7 minutes overtime.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.